Hey there, welcome back to 358 Outdoors. Today we begin our initial load development for a brand new Tikka T3 Lite Stainless in 308 Winchester. But first I want to thank you for being here. And if you're new to reloading, I am thrilled you've taken the step to get into a hobby that I've been passionate about for a very long time, and one that's brought me loads of enjoyment for a number of years, and I'm sure it's going to do the same for you too. So, as we get into reloading, above all else, we need to be safe, right? We need to focus, because if we don't, things can go south in a hurry, and we certainly don't want that. We also have to set some really practical expectations for our ammunition. You know, factory mass-produced rifles are only going to shoot so well. And, you know, with respect to big game hunting, you know, if your rifle's shooting an inch, that's plenty. And spending hours at the reloading bench trying to squeeze another quarter inch of accuracy out of your rifle, for me, I've learned that it's really not worth it. But you know, that you can make this whatever it is, and if you choose to do that, fantastic. We also have to understand that, like people, rifles have their own personality. You know, what may work really well in your 308 may not be worth a hill of beans in your kid's 308 or your buddy's 308. So just keep that in mind too. And I say these things so you don't get frustrated. Just have some real practical expectations, okay? So for this particular load that we're working on today, you know, when I look at loading for any hunting situation, I need to match the projectile to that situation. For instance, this load is going to be for white-tailed deer with shots that won't be over 200 yards. So certainly within the capability of the 308. And the projectile that I've chosen for this particular load is a Hornady 150 grain SST. And the book says I can get 2,800 feet a second out of it with a top load. But again, white-tailed deer, no longer than 200 yards, I certainly don't need 2,800 feet a second out of that 150. So more or less, I'm looking to load somewhere between 2,550 and 2,650. For example, if I get 2,600 feet a second out of it, at 200 yards, I'm looking at an impact velocity of around 2,200 feet per second with an energy around 1,600 foot-pounds, which is by far enough for any whitetail that walks the earth. So, without further ado, let's get to it. Okay, so today we're starting with 15 brand new 308 cases by Starline. Starline brass, Hornady brass, Winchester brass, they're all fantastic. You step up a level to the Nosler and the Norma brass, and then there's one level above that, and that's Lapua. The lesser expensive cases, they're great, but they do need just a little bit of prep work to get them truly ready to load. Now, I've said in a previous video that when we started out, we would literally take the brass from the bag and load it without doing any prep, and it worked just fine. But I found out over the years, you know, if you just put a little bit of effort into prepping the cases, that will go a long ways to putting out a better product, and I think you'll agree. So anyways, what we're going to do here, I've got a retting die set in the RCBS rock chucker. It's a sizing die, and that's going to, when we run the case through, that's going to uniform the mouth of the case. What that does is that provides us equal neck tension around the bullet when we seat it into the case. From that point, we're going to measure the cases to make sure that they are the proper length. And if we find that any are too long, we'll take them to the RCBS case trimmer, and we're going to trim the cases down to the proper length. Then once that step is completed, I'm going to take it over to the Lineman Case Prep Center, which is a fantastic tool, and we'll knock out the rest of the case prep there. So we'll get started here, kind of show you what it looks like, and then we'll move on to the next. So whenever I run a case through this, especially if I'm working with multiple pieces, I will always flip it upside down, just simply so I know which ones are completed. And also, I think I failed to mention, these cases are sprayed down with the one-shot quick lube by Hornady. If you don't lube your cases, they will get stuck in the die, and you certainly don't want to do that. Okay, obviously really simple, nothing hard here. Okay, now that I've run them all through the die here. Next thing you want to do is grab your reloading manual, look at the 308, and you're going to want to look at the max case length. And then there should also be a number there that says case trim length. So in this case, the max case length for the 308 is 2.015. And you generally want the cases to be shorter than that to allow for stretching. So the max, or the case trim length in this case, is 10 thousandths shorter, so 2.005. So you're going to want to take your dial caliper and just go through and measure them. And so that one's just a little bit shorter, 2.004, 2.003. You know, there's going to be just a tiny bit of variance between cases. Again, it's nothing that's uncommon. Really what you don't want is a case that's too long. Obviously, in a perfect world, you'd like them all to be perfect. This one's 2.005, so that's right where we need it to be. In a perfect world, they'd be all perfect, but they're not. So anyways, I'll quick measure these, and if we do have any that are longer, we'll take it over to the trim gate or the trim unit and we'll trim them up. So each case that we measured between 2.003 and 2.005. And although, you know, a couple were a couple thousandths short, you know, in the realm of big game hunting, it's not going to matter one bit. If I were shooting competitively or out west after prairie dogs at extreme distances, then I would certainly want to separate my cases at that point so that each loaded case is the same as the one before it. But now that we've done that, we move over to the Lyman Case Prep Center. Although not necessary, this piece of equipment has saved me an enormous amount of time over the last number of years. It's just extremely handy having all the tools right in one location. And in just a second here, you'll see when I turn the power on just how easy it is and how quickly you can get your cases prepped and ready to go. This little piece right here is your primer pocket uniformer. What that does is it makes sure that the primer pocket is at the correct depth and that the edges on the inside are square, so when you seat your primer, it seats squarely and it's just below flush from the case head. This next tool right here, those three edges, they will chamfer the outside of the case neck in case there are any burrs there. And certainly these next two steps you'd want to do if you had to trim your cases, because that certainly leaves an edge and a burr on both the outside and the inside of the case neck. This tool will then obviously take care of the inside of the case neck. It will also leave a bevel inside the case there, which helps initiate seating that bullet. And then this tall piece right here, this will take out the burr that's on the inside of the primer flash hole. So these lesser expensive cases, they will use a punch to punch that little flash hole there at the bottom of the primer pocket, and that allows the flash from the primer to ignite the powder on the inside. So you want to run the case down, you want to take that burr out. Just envision that case sitting sideways. The powder inside the case is somewhat shielded or protected from the burr, and when that flash comes into the case, it doesn't ignite the powder uniformly. And you know, it may sound like something completely minuscule. I understand it and I get that, but it really does make a difference. So anyways, this is an electronic tool, so you just turn it on, and I'm just going to do a few cases again just to show you kind of what this process looks like. And when you put the case on there, you want to use good uniform pressure. You don't want to press too hard. You really don't need to. Just let the tool do the work. And you don't need to hold it on very long. And And just like that, that case is ready to go. We'll do one more. So really that's all there is to it. Okay, now that the cases are all set, ready to go for priming, you can do it a couple different ways. You can get a hand primer like this. Very simple operation. Put the case in the shell holder, squeeze the handle, it seats the primer. Another way you can do it, and it's the way I prefer, at least for my rifle ammunition, is using the primer that's already in the rock chucker press. So I'll kind of show you what that's like here. When you put the ram up, this little lever right here has got a cup on the end of it, and you seat the primer in that. And then when you would put the case in the shell holder, and it's simply just lower the primer, lower the ram in the case down onto that cup, and it'll press the primer up into the case. So what does that look like in practice? Simply take a primer, slide it down into the cup, take the case, put it into the shell holder, press down, back up. You want to check it, it sits just flush, just below flush of the case head. And you want it to seat like that because if the primer is seated out further and there's room to go underneath it in that primer pocket, when that firing pin hits that primer, rather than detonating the primer and setting it off, it is going to push that primer into the case. And then there's a good chance that there may not be enough energy left in that firing pin to actually detonate the primer, and then you would get what we would call a light primer strike. And it's not so much because of a light spring in your firearm, but because that primer is not set all the way into the primer pocket. So you want to make sure that when you seat it, it's flush up against the base of the primer pocket, so you have good detonation. Simple as that. Again, doesn't take very long. So anyways, I'll finish these up and we'll get over to the powder. Okay, now that the cases are prepped, primed, and ready for powder, and then part 2 coming up shortly, we're going to get into the actual load development phase of the loading process. You know, why did I choose the powder that I chose? And why am I using 15 cases? It kind of seems odd. And then, you know, we're going to get into how I dispense the powder. I probably do it a little bit different than other folks, which is fine. And then lastly, we're going to get into the bullet seating depth and how we determine how far that bullet gets seated. And we're going to use a pretty neat tool that Hornady puts out to determine that. So stick around and look out for part 2, which is going to be coming up shortly. And I appreciate you being here at 358 Outdoors. We'll see you next time. God bless.